start recording this. So about 2 months ago, Carl approached me, reached out, and it was like, would your audience be interested in a presentation on getting published? And I said, maybe. And then Carl kind of explained his background, which is, I think, 10 or 20 years of experience getting people published. And after that, I said, yes, absolutely. If you've got that much experience, I want to put you in front of my people so that they can learn what you know about how to get published. So that's why Carl is sort of up on the stage today. As you know, I'm very interested in helping you learn and apply ways to generate leads for your development shop. And I'm particularly interested in ways that are good at building trust. Getting published in a sort of authoritative, respected publication that your ideal clients read ranks really high up there in terms of ability to build trust. And so that's why Carl's here. That's why we're taking time to do this. And I think with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Carl, and I'm going to mute myself and just be here to sort of manage the questions in the chat window while you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Phil. I like what Phil is doing in helping people to develop a niche, or we would call it a niche. Up here in Canada, we call it a niche. In America, it's called a niche, I think, which is a mispronunciation, but that's okay. Anyway, just going through this here PowerPoint. This is about getting published, and it's for anyone who's got expertise in a particular area. So what you're going to learn is how publishing articles can help your career, how to find publications that are trusted by your clients, something of the best way to present your idea to those clients, something of motivations, in how you sort of generate interest in your idea, and 2 possible themes you can use. And then finally, around making it happen, even if you hate writing.
Go ahead, Carl, are you going to share your screen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. That would help, wouldn't it? Okay, I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to share the screen. Share screen. You don't want to see an email. What you want to see is not my microphone. You don't want to see my friend Anne. What you want to see is a PowerPoint, which is right here. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, and we're going to go on to here. Now, one little issue is that I can still see you, which is not a problem, or is it?
No, we're good.
Okay.
We've got a row of thumbnails on the right, but it's not overlapping your slides. So
okay. Well, it overlaps my slides, so it was a bit anyway. Okay, sure. Okay, so backing up here a bit. Okay, what you'll learn is something about the motivations involved in creating an article, and 2 themes you can use to develop yours, and something about making it happen. And I say, even if you hate writing, and a lot of people either don't like writing or people don't like reading their writing. So that's why that part of the presentation is in there. So Administraria, as Philip says, no sales pitch at the end. I will ask you, if you're interested, to subscribe to my free weekly newsletter on the topic. And there's also a link to a 4-page action guide that will help you put these ideas into action. So a bit about my background. About 15 years, depending on how you count it, experience in journalism, which sort of gives me an idea of how to work with the news media and how to find a story and how the news media operate. About 3 years in B2B sales, so you sort of learn how to present ideas. And then also about 15 years of helping clients to publish their expertise. And you see some of the publications here that I've helped people get published in. And like some of these are really, really narrow niche publications. Like over there on the right, you can see Pit and Quarry. Like who would have thought there's a whole magazine just for people who operate gravel pits? But there are about 3 of those. And if you're not in that business, you've never heard of it, it would be a complete bowl of snore for you. But for a lot of people in that business, it's really important. So if, for example, you're creating solutions for pits and quarries, well, that's a publication you want to be in. So a lot of these have really, really narrow publications. So why do you want to get published? Well, one thing I like about it is it gives you a chance to think through your ideas in greater depth. Like if you're being asked to put out a 1,500-word article, that's a 2-page article on a topic, this really helps you think through your ideas. And you learn to focus on your market's needs. So not so much what you do, but how it works for your clients. For example, if you got solutions, say, for solar power generators, then you'll be able to apply your ideas to that particular market or what it needs. So one way to get your ideas published is to get into media that they know and trust, because that helps to demonstrate the independent credibility of your ideas. Like if you're reaching solar publications, well, one way to do it is through a publication called Solar Builder, which appears in print and also online. But what I really like about it is here, this section called Features. And like looking at the screen here, you can see an ad here from a company called Sunline. Now, I don't know what they paid for putting an ad on every page of this particular publication. But the techniques you'll learn here is how you can get your ideas published in a magazine like Solar Builder at no money at all. Like publications don't pay for the article, but they also don't charge you for the space. So instead of spending a few $100 or a few $1,000s on an advertisement, you can definitely get your ideas into a publication like this free of charge. So which media do your clients trust? That's what you got to find. And one way is niche print magazines. And those are actually still rocking. Everybody says print is dead. It's not. It's really alive. And one of the actually only really good sources one area where print publications still are alive is in the niche trade publication category. And that's partly because advertisers love the way their ads get better interaction in print than they do online. But there are also content-rich edited websites. Many of them are run by associations or business professional groups. And there are also respected third-party blogs and podcasts that are one way to get your ideas out there. So how do you find the right media? Well, one way is just simply to know your market. Like if you know what your market is all about, you know what they read. But you can also ask colleagues, customers, and clients. And then my little secret weapon in this area actually is online search by means of a reference librarian. Like go to your public library like we got here, and you'll find a lot of resources available, like media guides and other databases that your library would have, either a public library or else if you got access to a university or college library. Those are also good ways to do it. But also just ask your reference librarian for help on finding publications, and they'll be able to help you. So how do you make your idea fit the publication? Well, one thing you got to know, and having been an editor, I can understand this, that many editors get articles that don't fit the publication. Like going back to the solar power example. If you've got an idea that is good for a different type of power, like say you've done solutions around tidal power generation or wind power, well, the editor of Solar Builder doesn't care about that. The editor of Solar Builder wants ideas that are relevant to solar power installation. That's what they want. Because all publications have a niche focus. You have to find that and make sure your idea fits. How do you find that out? Well, you read the publication. And many editors tell me one of their chief problems is they get ideas for articles or articles themselves from people who have clearly not read the publication. They have the foggiest idea what it's all about. So it also helps if you understand some of the sections of the publication to get a clear idea of what they publish. So how do you get the editor's buy-in first? Like a lot of people make a mistake. They sit down, in a fit of creativity, they write this article, and then they try to get it published. Well, it really doesn't work very well because editors these days get a lot of articles that are submitted in mass production. Like the article has been sent to 15 or 1,500 different publications, and they don't know where that article's been. And so they're concerned about the provenance of the articles they get. Because there's so much stuff that's ripped off the web, copyright violations, and they don't want to get caught up in that. And also, they want something specifically for their readers. So that's what they want. They want content that's created specifically for them. How do you do that? Well, you sell your idea first. by means of what I call a query letter. Now, a query is a freelance journalist term. I've used it many times in my freelance writing work. And it contains 4 points. It's just a simple little letter that sort of pre-sells the idea, and it's kind of like a proposal. In the first thing, you describe the topic in 1 or 2 sentences. That's all you really need. You know, say you're writing an article on new solutions for solar power. You say, here's why this, here's what the idea is. And then you have to present to your editor the idea of why the readers of that particular publication would care about this topic. Because many publications, as I said, get topics that aren't of interest to their readers. And you need to explain why this is an issue. Why do you need to write on this particular topic, and why would their readers care about it? Then the editor's going to want to know, well, okay, what's the article going to look like? And have you thought through your idea? So you put out a bullet point outline, like 1 line each, saying, here are the points you want to cover in the article, just to show you thought it through. And then the editor's going to want to know, well, okay, it sounds like a good idea, but are you the person who's qualified to write on this particular topic? So you put in your qualifications. And that would include your academic qualifications, if you have them, your professional qualifications, like say you're an engineer, well, you got your PE designation. And then you also want to put in your experience in that field, because the editor wants to be sure that the ideas and information they're publishing is credible. And this really matters particularly in print publications, because print publications, there's a pretty small, what they call a news hole. That's the journalistic term. It's called the news hole. A pretty small number of pages available for articles, and they treasure those pages, and they want to make sure that what is produced is worth the print, basically. Online publications, they're not quite as picky because they got a huge news hole to fill, and it's as big as the world because there's no limitation to the amount of space they can put. But in a print publication with, say, 56 pages, well, that's what they need to fill, and they want to make sure that it's good content. So just as an example of what a query letter could look like, say your topic is you're able to help clients deal with health and safety issues in inspections in manufacturing. Now, that's a pretty narrow topic, but I know that Philip's all about helping people with niche ideas to reach that, so that's what I cooked up here. So you'd say, okay, here's the topic. You want to say you want to write about more comprehensive health and safety inspections in manufacturing. Then you'd indicate why. Well, let's say, for example, that the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Agency has come up with new regulations in this area. Then you put out an outline. You talk about the new rules, and you're going to say how to comply with those new rules, and then also what kind of software you've got to help with that. And then the editor's going to want to know about your qualifications. Like, say you're a certified industrial hygienist, and that is a real designation for this area. And if I were doing articles on health and safety or thinking of publishing those, I would want someone who's a CIH in order to be able to do that. So that's one qualification. You could also see you've got a certain amount of experience in helping industrial companies to meet OSHA requirements. So at the end, the little handout at the end here is what I call an action guide, and this is just a little clip from it. So this is, the action guide is like a fill-out form on how to get the editor's buy-in for your idea before you write it. So that'll be available at the end of the webinar. So on from that, say you've got your idea presented to the editor. Well, what do you write about? Well, the idea has to motivate. It has to motivate the reader to take some kind of action. In other words, to get in touch with you. Because you're not just creating information just for the sake of information here. You're also wanting to make sure that the article is going to result in some kind of traction for you. In other words, you want them to reach out to you. So only 2 ways to motivate anybody to do anything. One is to convince them they have a problem they got to solve. Like a serious problem, there's a problem that sits here. Or the other is to convince them they have an opportunity they got to grab hold of. So in other words, I call those, and problems tend to motivate better, but I call those fear and greed. Now, those aren't nice terms, but they sure are memorable because you're going to remember them, right? So fear is an article that is based on the idea of avoiding a problem. Greed is about finding ways to motivate people to get some kind of a benefit. So you got to have one or the other. Now, some ideas are both. So it's kind of a good idea to do both if you can. But if you got to go down one side or the other, I think fear is probably a better way to scare people. So, for example, say you're a retailer Or say you're trying to reach retailers rather, and you've got solutions around retail. Now, every store in the world is worried about Amazon these days because Amazon just gets more and more and more market share. There's more stuff going online commerce these days, less people actually walking into a retail store to buy stuff. So if you've got solutions on how to avoid your store being Amazoned, because Amazon offers more selection at lower prices in a lot of cases, and sometimes it's more convenient. So what can you offer your retail customers to be able to help them to deal with the Amazon problem? So first of all, you got to scare them. You got to scare them with the idea that here's Amazon coming to get you, and here are your solutions on how to make that go away. So fear content actually has to be scary. It has to be about a real problem that's pressing on them right now. If it isn't, they're not going to pay attention. Now, you know, in your own business, if you're creating a solution, well, it has to be in response to a real problem. And so your content, your articles you publish has to be on that as well. So it's a good idea if you can put out quantifiable risks and describe the potential losses from the problem here. Like, for example, if you're going the retail route, you can say that Amazon's getting bigger share, more and more people are buying stuff online, and that means less retail traffic, and how do you avoid that? Because they need to accept that it's there and it's going to hurt. So that's what fear content has to do. It has to actually scare them. So how do you design fear-oriented content? Well, I'd say 4 points. One is to describe the problem in terms that they actually understand, like foot traffic, like retail, like velocity of products, whatever you can do to demonstrate this is a real problem. And then you need to think about what their reaction to that might be. Now, they might come up with what are called objections. Now, that's a sales term. And what it means is reasons not to buy. Like if you say, hey, do you want to buy my widget? And they come back and say, well, okay, no, because here's why. So they're objections. And they're objections to your idea might be of two kinds. One is the idea of not me. In other words, okay, it's going to affect people, but it won't affect me. In other words, I've got a perfect store. It's not going to get Amazoned. Then you would also consider the idea they might say it's not a problem or no problem. In other words, even if there is Amazon out there and it's taking my market share, I've got a way to deal with that. So you need to consider those objections and then deal with them in your content. Then you describe the potential impacts of the problem. And then you give your recommendations as to how they can avoid the problem and sort of take care of how to either avoid or deal with the problem. Now, you'll notice in here, there's no sales pitch. It can't be a sales pitch. It has to be honest to God useful information because editors don't want to publish a sales pitch. And if you come up with that, and I've seen this happen, is that sometimes my clients, if I ghostwriting an article for them, they'll come up with all these little self-serving little phrases. They think I'm not doing enough to sell their business. And I know the editor's just going to pull those little phrases back out again. So I say, don't even bother. And you don't need it. You know, as long as you've demonstrated your situation and the solution you offer and your recommendations, you've shown you've got good solutions to offer, they'll get in touch. So on the greed side of things, how do you stimulate people to take action because of a benefit that they want to access? And one example is, say you've developed some kind of a solution around public transit, particularly light rail transit. So you've got a solution to help trains either run more on time or have fewer breakdowns, or how to have better on-time scheduling, or some other kind of solution. So you're going to demonstrate some kind of a benefit here, and it's going to be wrapped around some kind of public transit thing, and you want to get this published in maybe a public transit publication. And there are several out there. I've written for them. So greed-oriented content, it has to actually motivate. It has to make them, hey, I want some of that. Because if you don't motivate them, they're not going to take action. So in order to develop effective greed-oriented content, you need to agree. The readers need to agree that the opportunity is there and it's both practical and attainable. Those are important concepts. And also the benefits must be near-term available. And generally that means either an uptick in sales or some other reasonably quantifiable data point they can benefit from. So you really do need to have quantifiable data on the improvements that are possible with your idea. So how do you design greed-oriented content? Well, it's similar to the fear stuff. You describe the opportunity in ways that they can understand, and then you would deal with objections. And those objections could be in two forms. One is there's too much hassle, or we tried that, or a friend of mine tried that and it didn't work. So you need to, in developing your content, you need to think of the objections that they would have. You know, too much hassle, or been there, tried that, didn't work. And then you provide your implementation steps, which, now the implementation steps cannot be around, hey, buy my stuff. It has to be around a practical idea that they can actually access. So there, I'd like to take a pause and see if we've got any questions. Now I got full screen here, so I can't really see if we've got anything typed in. Philip, you got anything?
No questions yet in the chat, although I'm scribbling down my own questions on a 3x5 note card here.
Okay.
I want to say to, if folks have questions, you can, if you want to just unmute and fire away, we'll just pause for a moment and see if there's any questions right now. What I am getting, Carl, is that this is a very practical, interesting talk, so keep it up.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. I got a dumb question. How are we doing for time? I don't have a clock here.
Let me see. So right now it's 8:24. I'm not going to come burn down your house if you go a few minutes over. So
okay, sure. Okay.
Go at a pace that's comfortable for you.
Okay, sure. That sounds good. Okay, on we go then. Newsjacking. Now, okay, two sort of like themes. Okay, those were two motivations, greed and fear. So the article has to either push one of those buttons, basically. It has to be fear-oriented or greed-oriented. Because, and you know, like if you're not able to solve a problem or help someone get an access to a benefit, you know, what are you doing? You know, your product doesn't got legs, because it has to do one or the other. So the content you put out there actually has to talk about those two as well. So, okay, newsjacking. Now it's a content marketing term, and it basically means taking a news event and then wrapping your content around it. So now the news event could be something that's going to affect your market. Now, I just thought of a really, really weird solution or example here. And say you're into helping cruise ships. That's the market you're chasing, and you want to provide better experiences for passengers using technology. And let's say you hear about a new ship that's been launched, and it's got a really, really great Wi-Fi system, and it's got the ability to do actually ship-to-shore Wi-Fi, which is, I guess, not that well done. It helps passengers understand the entertainment options available on the ship. They can sign up for things electronically. So you've heard that a ship has got that kind of a solution. And what you want to do is your customers are screaming at you, they want to match it. So the news event in this case is the launching of a new ship with new IT capabilities that help the passenger experience improve. So that's the news. So we'll just unwrap that a little bit. So newsjacking, it's important because it helps customers understand that your company can help them deal with sudden changes. Like if there's a new development that comes up, you're on it. You understand their world because you understand the current developments that are affecting them. So this means that you don't understand just your technology. You also understand their world. And I think that's really, really important because customers need to know that you got their back, that you can understand what's going to affect them, and that includes new items that are affecting them. So I think it's important to focus on what I call narrowcast news. So not stuff they're going to find on CNN or Huffington Post, not mainstream news. It has to be really, really narrow. Like if you're dealing in cruise ships, that's a pretty narrow market. There's only a few thousand of things out there probably. Now they're getting bigger and bigger with more and more customers. But it has to be something possibly from your world that affects theirs. Like say you're helping people deal with regulatory concerns. And so you can talk about a topic that matters, that is from your world, but it affects them. So it also has to be a topic on which you have to recognize credibility, which could either mean your academic background or your professional background or your experience, one of those three ways. So the topic you choose has to be one on which you have credibility. So how do you design newsjacking content? Well, first of all, you summarize the relevant news event. Okay, launch new ship, got better Wi-Fi capabilities. How do you match it? Then you talk about how it's going to develop. You give your informed opinion. You put yourself out there. You say, okay, here's how I think it's going to happen, how it's going to play out, and you give your reasons for that. And then you give your payload, which is your recommendations on how to either avoid a problem or gain some kind of benefit. So again, we got fear and greed in here. So you summarize the relevant news event, you talk about how it's going to develop, and then you give your recommendations. That's where you add your value, is in how you can actually help them avoid harm or gain some kind of benefit. Another type of content here is what I call trend spotting, which is kind of like newsjacking, only it's in slow motion. So a news is about a news event. There's a hard change here, a new law, a new regulation, a new disruptive technology, or something just came down the pike or something. Trend spotting is more about slow developments that are happening. But sometimes those slow developments can catch you, and all of a sudden you discover you can't do business. So one trend I see with some of my clients advise mining companies on how to work in the developing world. Now, it sounds like a rather narrow niche, but that's what they do. So what you see here is a picture of what's called a chikudu, which is it's a freight bicycle. And I took this when I was on a consulting gig in DR Congo a number of years ago. And here you see a couple of guys who are pushing this thing because it's cheaper to hire them than it is to use a truck. That shows you something about the cost of fuel in Eastern Congo, and also how cheap labor is. So these guys are probably going to be pushing that chikudu for a long time because they don't have any other opportunities. But if they had access to education, they could. And that is a really big trend, in that mining companies are under more and more pressure to create social economic opportunities for the people affected by the mine. So if you've got people who are living close to the mine, you really have to create employment opportunities and education for the people who are affected by it. That's becoming a trend. So that's an example of a trend that would be affecting people who are affecting mining companies. And if you've got solutions around that, well, that's a market for you. So trend spotting is about a slow development that you see that is affecting the people you need to reach. So trend spotting works because customers want to know that you have customized solutions available. And I understand that's a big thing with people on this webinar, is finding customized solutions for the people that they want to serve. So you need to show that your company understands their world. One way to do that is to create content that demonstrates your understanding of a trend, because they depend on your company to watch out for their interests. Kind of like newsjacking as well. But if you understand the big picture that's affecting your clients, that's what you can see in a trend. Like, anybody can write stuff around news that's happening. But trend, well, it takes time to notice that kind of thing. And it takes background, it takes wisdom, experience. So if you can demonstrate that, you got it made in terms of being able to generate trend spotting type content. So how do you design it? Well, you summarize the trend, you talk about it. Okay, the need to provide employment and economic opportunities for people affected by mines. You give us historic causes. In other words, that that there have been protests, there have been roadblocks, there have been people killed, there have been a whole bunch of bad things happening because people running mining companies ignored the people who were affected by those mines. You provide some kind of statistical backup if it's available. So you can talk about new regulations from the International Labour Organization and others that are affecting this trend. So you describe the current situation. Here's how it's developing. Again, you think of your thoughts on how it's going to develop, give your reasons for that. And then finally, your punchline, the payload of the article, is you give your recommendations on how to avoid harm or gain some kind of a benefit. So those are my types of content. So you got the two basic motivators. So you got fear and greed. And then you got your two types of content. And there are more. That's just two that I was able to come up with here. And those are around newsjacking, where you take a new development and develop your content wrapped around that. And then also you got trend spotting, which is where you take a slower development and wrap your content around that sort of thing. So how to make it happen? Well, I got this background in journalism. I can write. I do that. A lot of people here don't. So if you've got trouble writing, one way to do it is to outsource that writing. and helping develop the content. Now, three kinds of writing professionals, if you will, here who can help you. One is what you call a ghostwriter. Now, that would be someone who interviews you and then writes a first draft of the article. And I do a lot of this for my clients, is that I interview them, say, over the phone or by Skype or personally, whatever, and I just make notes, and then I develop a first draft based around what they said. So a ghostwriter starts from scratch with a blank screen and makes this happen. Now, the article has to be your ideas. They're just kind of like a stenographer in this area. And you'd have to review the article. And I know the articles I do, I never get it right the first time. The client always has changes to make. Another type of professional is the copy editor who would take your first draft and clean it up, make it pretty. And I do some of this kind of work, but I'm not that terribly good at it. So I generally bump that off to other people. But a copy editor can take that. Now, a proofreader is something pretty much everybody reads. I mean, I've got a proofreader. She happens to be in Nairobi, and I just email my stuff to her, and she emails it back. But a proofreader would take your manuscript and just exercise some quality control on it, who cleans up the grammar, who checks to make sure there's no misspellings in it, and the cases agree with each other and all that kind of stuff. Another way to do it, if you have trouble writing, if you can talk better than you write, will be just to talk, and you record it, and you have it transcribed. Now, they can be done with things like Dragon and other technical solutions. I use a transcriber actually she's in Cairo, and what I do is I just record the thing and convert it to an MP3 file and put it up on Dropbox, and she picks it up from there, and she sends me back a transcription in Word, and then she gets paid. So that's the other way to do it. So there are ways to make this happen that aren't painful, because writing, it's not everybody's cup of tea, you know? So these are the three kinds of people, well, actually four, you can use. One's a ghostwriter, there's a copy editor, there's a proofreader, and you might say a transcriber is the fourth type, although that can be done electronically too. So how to find this kind of help? Well, look for freelance journalists. There have been so much downsizing in the news business these days that there are a lot of really good writers out there who will work. They're kind of glad to be able to get this kind of work, you know? So you find freelance journalists. How you find them? Well, you can ask your connections. And you can also go to sites like Upwork. Upwork is an international resource for freelancers. So you can post jobs there. In fact, that's how I found my transcriber, was using Upwork. And you can also, if you've got work you need to do, well, you post yourself up there as being, I'm a web designer, or I'm some other type of communications professional. But I've had good results with Upwork. I've never actually found work that myself. I'm not doing it that way. But I do find business professionals who are able to help me with things like formatting an ebook or transcribing or website development. One thing about it is photography really makes a difference. There's been the whole online thing. There's been so much of an explosion of really, I call them stupid looking stock imagery. Like people in suits jumping hurdles or climbing cliffs. I keep waiting to see somebody in a suit scuba diving or something like that. But photography really makes a difference. If you want to get your articles published, if you can include photography, this really helps. Like, this is an article that I did for a mining publication, and that is a picture that I took. It was one day after Christmas, a beautiful sunny day, and that is a mine, a disused mine. And the picture looks almost pretty, and it would have been, the article would have been nothing without that picture. So if you could include your own photographs, like a lot of editors don't like to take stock photography because they don't know where that picture's been. They don't know who's got the ethical rights to use it, how many copyright issues there are on it. But if you've taken your own pictures, that means something you own. So I take my camera, I use my iPhone, and I just snap pictures like this. That was more or less just happened to be driving past this mine, and I took a picture of it. And I've used that picture so many times. So you can definitely do this. It's a really good way to add appeal to the article, more likely to get it published. That's definitely for sure. And I find photography is a really good way to help your article get pick up. So that is pretty much what I want to talk about. I've been babbling here. I'm waiting to hear what you've got in terms of questions. So as I say, I think the next slide would give you a link to an action plan you can download, and it'll help you apply the learning. Like this is sort of like a workbook kind of thing. It's just 5 pages, but it'll help you develop a plan that works for you. Also, you can give an opportunity to try the weekly newsletter. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe, no problem. So I would suggest, if you're interested, to download that action guide and then print it out, and that way you can start applying these ideas right away if you're so keen. Anyway, so here is the Q&A session, and you can download the action guide, and there is the link to do that. So, Phil, how are we doing?
Great. Let's leave that slide up for a little bit, and
well, it's my last slide anyway. Yeah,
and do some questions here. So I'll start us out with questions, and then there's a raise hand feature. I'm not sure exactly where that is in the user interface, but if you want to raise your hand if you got a question.
We found it last time, yesterday.
Yeah,
we did a test of the system.
I'm the host, and I don't have it in mind. So anyway, you'll find it. You're resourceful people. Raise your hand if you have a question. I've got a few of my own, and I'll kick things off. Actually, this is a tiny detail question for you, Carl. Submitting pictures, do you do that in the query letter, or do you do that later in the process, let's say after the editor has said, yeah, let's do this? When would you send, art or images to accompany the article?
That's in the query.
Okay.
What I'll put out that, 4 or 5 points. And then at the bottom, what I'll usually say, and this is a good question, I'll usually say, this will be an exclusive article. In other words, you haven't sent it anywhere else. It's on spec, which is a term they use, on speculation, basically, because some editors think that if you're writing an article, you expect it to get published, and that's not the case. Like, there's no guarantee it'll get published, because it kind of depends on how much space they've got available, but also depends on what you turn out. Like, they don't know when they sit down, but when they give you a yes to the query, they're not giving you a yes to the article. They're saying, just go ahead, give it a try. I'm not promising to publish this thing, but give it a try. If you say it's on spec, that means you get it. You understand that. And then you'd also say in that little paragraph at the end, we have pictures available. And that kind of increases the chance it'll get published. Now, and when I do the article, I'll usually send the pictures along. As just a JPEG file. Now, one thing to note about this is that it's not so much a problem now, but it used to be. Like, a lot of smartphones used to pump out pictures that were like about like a few kilobytes in size, right. And those are way too light. Right. Print, you need high quality, yeah, and high resolution, over a meg size. So I find I'll send a few of those along, and they'll get published. Like that one with the mine, that was a 2-page spread, So that's a pretty big area. And I'm just glad I was using a real camera instead of my iPhone at that time, because the iPhone I had was a 3, and that just low quality. So yeah, high quality, and just send them along.
So can you kind of walk folks through what the process is like after the query letter? Let's say that you get a positive response to the query letter, which I assume could be an email. It doesn't have to be a physical letter, right?
Well, let's say you get no response. Okay. What you do, like, editors, busy folks, they get a lot of this kind of stuff. Uh-huh. So what I'll usually do, if I haven't worked with an editor before, then I'll just send a follow-up with a query. And the subject line will say something like, just checking, I know you get a lot of emails, but this is a real query. It's not written by a machine. Yeah. So that quite often gets their interest. You can follow up with a phone call. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing about editors' lives is they're kind of bipolar in that they're either really busy or really, really, really busy. So if they're on deadline, if they're trying to meet your press date, they aren't going to talk to you. They're focused on their stuff. And if you try to talk to them, 1, you won't get their full brain engaged, and 2, you sound like a jerk. So always when you call an editor, you ask them, hey, do you have time to discuss a query? And they'll say yes or no. These are not pilots. If they say no, you ask them, when do I call you back? And it might be this afternoon, or it might be next week, or it might be next lifetime. But generally, they need ideas. They need articles because they can't afford to pay freelancers. They need free stuff. So they need you. They sound like jerks. They need what you've got. Okay. So you just be a little bit gently persistent.
Okay, so don't let if they give you the impression that they're annoying you or that you're annoying them, don't let that dissuade you.
It's part of the personality style.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of like stockbrokers are obnoxious and pushy.
Mm,
I mean, that's the stereotype, right?
sure.
Editors have got this, they got to be brusque and crabby. And there are so many reporter editor types on television programs and in movies that have had those things, so they feel like they have to act like that for some reason. But really, they need you, believe it or not.
Yeah. No, I believe it. So when would you stop following up? Let's say you just continue to get no response. How many times would you follow up?
I'd say two or three, and then he goes
Okay.
to go somebody else.
Okay.
Because the no is either means they're disorganized or that's just how they say no.
Right.
And they do get a ton of mail. And a lot of it is written by PR people, and a lot of it's spam bots, and there's just so much stuff out there. So, it just might be their way of saying no.
So, how do you, okay, so there's this idea of exclusivity, right? So that makes me think you're going to come up with the concept for the article. You're going to pick the publication where you think that would have the most impact or just be most effective, right? And then let's say that publication doesn't go for it. Can you then shop it around to somebody else and say it's exclusive? Do you have to tell the first publication, I'm moving on?
If they don't get back, you just give them a little bit of time. What you might do is just as to basically CYA, you might just say, okay, I've sent you this query. I figure you're not interested, so I'm going to send it someplace else. And that way it's on record saying that, well, okay, so you didn't pick up on it. But
I'm sure that rarely happens to you.
It does happen, particularly if I haven't dealt with an editor before.
Okay.
Or it's a slightly shaky topic. And I know one issue, of course, I have with this is that sometimes the idea you come out with is pretty generic. Any readers would need this sort of thing. Like, say you're developing, human resources solutions. Well, anybody over a 2-person company has got HR issues. And so it can be hard to sometimes say why this should matter to a publication that deals with restaurants. Like, what HR issues are there specifically with restaurants? Well, actually there are. But if you were to talk about, some other publications, it's kind of hard to say why your topic would really be relevant to their readers specifically.
Right.
But you can generally find some kind of an excuse to write for them.
Okay. Well, of course, my bias is, well, you need to be more narrow and specific with your topic. Do you have other troubleshooting recommendations for, let's say you try this and it's just kind of not working. Editors aren't responding. You're doing everything right, but they're just not responding. Do you have other troubleshooting tips?
Good question. I would think it's probably your idea that it needs to be more relevant to them. So I would say look through the publication, get an idea of what the issues are facing them. And there are probably ways to get news alerts on this kind of thing so that your idea has to relate to something they're dealing with specifically. Now, one thing about most monthly publications is that a magazine, a print magazine, generally works about 3 or 4 months out in advance. Like if I'm pitching ideas right now, here it is currently toward the end of July, I would be pitching ideas for October or so.
Uh-huh.
Now, one little trick you can do is go onto their website, and somewhere on the website you will find something called a media guide, which will list it's for advertisers, but you can use it too. So it'll tell you what circulation is, what industries they come from. It'll tell you also what special issues they have coming up. So if some industries have seasons, like going back to, retail. Well, okay, here it is July, and they're already ordering. Well, they probably ordered a long time ago for Christmas. And so you need to note what their special issues are. Like say they've got an issue that your article would be perfect for, and it's coming up next month. Well, you missed it. Try next year. A lot of people make that mistake. It's a kind of rookie mistake, is to try to get an article published too quickly. And it generally takes about 3 or 4 months in a monthly publication, longer if it's a bi-monthly, like 6 times a year. So increase the chances by making sure this would be perfect for your December issue on retail, whatever.
You mentioned that ads in print get better interaction, and part of me thought, well, that's not what Google would tell you.
Well, of course not.
Ads, and I'm curious for more detail on that.
Have more numbers on that. Well, the answer is around the continuing viability of print publications. They're still there. Like, you would think if you're going to serve, 6,000 readers, you're going to want to do that online, because the setup costs and such like that of running a printing press and all that are so huge. You're turning it off after 5,000 copies. So the fact that the print publications are still there, and maybe say it's a generational thing. I don't know. I had one smart-ass solar, actually he was a wind power developer, and I showed him the publications, and he said, well, I don't read print publications. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe you don't, but the people you want to reach, those with the money, what do? They read print, okay? They're still alive and kicking. Where else you gonna go?
Yeah.
If you want to learn something about a particular niche practice, you want their trade publication. So that's where you put your stuff. You go where they're looking. So, and I look at what they're costing. Okay, I write for publications. There's one, it is called, let's pick an example here, E&P, Exploration and Production. This is for the upstream oil and gas sector. They charge roughly $5,000 to $7,000 a page for advertising.
Mm-hmm.
That's a one-page insertion. Mm. And, if you can get that article published in that publication for $0, well, it's got more impact anyway than the advertisement. But the fact is that these people, some very smart companies, continue to advertise in these publications. It seems to say something to me. So that's why I think it's important to get your articles in there too.
Yeah, that's great. It either means they're not measuring the results of their ad spend, which I think is unlikely if they're going to drop $5,000 to $7,000 for a one-page ad.
Well,
or it means it works, right?
Yeah. I'm reminded of when New Coke came out a few years back. Everybody protested. All these traditional Coke drinkers, they said, "You've arrested my soft drink. You're disturbing my identity." And somebody asked Coke afterwards, "Did you know there was going to be that backlash?" And what this Coke rep answered, "Well, we're not that smart, and we're not that stupid." So I think with print publications, some very big companies, hopefully with smart money, continue to advertise in them. Mm-hmm. Can they get an ROI off that? Heck no. In fact, I can't even demonstrate the ROI off what I do. I can tell you how many readers read this publication, 35,000. Mm-hmm. I can tell you what supposedly is the pass-along value from that publication. In other words, for an average of 4 people read this publication. But beyond that, no, you can't quantify it.
Yeah.
So it's an act of faith. The good thing about it, it forces you to think through your ideas in depth with the reader in mind. So that's an advantage. It gives you something you can put on your profile, on your LinkedIn profile. You can send it out by email. You can put it up on your Twitter, all kinds of ways. You can do a printed reprint of the article you hand to people physically in a real meeting, live face-to-face. And that has a degree of credibility that quite often your own blog just doesn't have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my view, third-party credibility is some of the most desirable form of credibility. If someone else, it's one thing to say, well, we're really good at creating software solutions for X, but if someone else says that, it's much more powerful. Where does something like the Harvard Business Review live in the sort of landscape of publications?
I'm not sure that it does. HBR, Sloan Management Review, and in fact, just about every major B school out there has got some kind of a thought leadership publication that showcase their people's thought leadership. I don't know. I'm going to say, I really don't know about that.
Okay.
And then I'm going to say, well, it is very hard to get into. You're going to have an absolute bleeding edge idea. You've got to be a rock star already. So I'll stick with my print pubs. It's just so much easier.
So is there some sort of way that you see, like imagine someone's never done this before, and I know that's what your entire presentation is about. Is there some easy way to start, or can they kind of start at a less authoritative publication and kind of work their way up?
You could start with the niche publications,
Okay.
the ones that go to either professions or occupations. And there are really three ways these publications organize themselves. We'll make it four. One is around a particular industry. Like, Mining International is a mining publication. Coal Age, which I've written for, is an industry publication.
Mm-hmm.
There are also those based around a particular profession. Like if you're trying to reach lawyers, for example, there are legal publications out there.
Mm-hmm.
There are also publications that are devoted to a particular cause. Like one of my examples is a publication I've dealt with. It's called Renew Canada, which is around infrastructure renewal. There are also publications like Detroit Business or local business publications, and I find those very hard to get into because they're mostly written by reporters and full-time journalists. They don't have much room for a column on web design, for example, or on some other topic, because it would have to be local for local implications, and that's hard to do as well. So I'd say stick with the industrial publications, those going to a particular industry, or if your clients are mostly around a particular profession, find their professional publication. They've all gone: engineering, accounting, actuarial science, whatever.
Okay. A learner asks a really good question. He's in India, lives in a remote town. So public, libraries of any size sound like they're out of reach, like they're just physically inaccessible.
Yep.
Are there other ways, like online methods, that you found are successful for finding trade publications, niche publications?
I wish I could say yes. I've had some success with general searching by Google. Like just look up, oil and gas publications. Just do a Google search under that. It should turn out more solutions, but it typically doesn't.
Okay.
But
are there publications that are kind of invisible to Google? Like they exist, but no amount of Google searching will find them?
You mean the dark net?
Yeah, the dark net of niche paper publications.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a whole industry around newsletters. Like if you're a legislator in South Carolina, you want to know about what South Carolina's Environmental Protection Agency is doing. And there is almost certainly a narrow newsletter that circulates for a few hundred or a few $1,000s a year subscription. That they're pretty dark. But for finding publications, my favorite solution is an online database. It's called Cision, and I don't have any relationship to them, but I know they charge about $1,500 US a year for a subscription. But sometimes your friendly local library will have access to that. If you don't have access to those kind of resources, try Google. Just try different search terms, and you'll come up with something eventually.
Okay. Could you spell out that the last thing you mentioned?
Cision, CISION.com. So CISION, like decision, only with the desk part taken out. And it's a paid resource. I don't think they offer a free trial. It's used by PR firms, and and there are others out there, but that's the best one that I know of.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and I would imagine that even over the phone, you could get some of this information from a library if there's not one, convenient within travel distance. Okay, that's good. Yeah, and I have seen certain of those paid proprietary databases made available to library like card holders through the online portal. So that might be another option depending on the library.
Oh yes, yeah. Cision is good for print. They'll do TV, radio. They came out of being a media directory. In fact, I
Okay.
used to subscribe to the print version of that. But there are newer ones. And Meltwater is one of them, which is more of a blogger online kind of a thing. It's based out of Norway. So Meltwater, as in
Okay.
Meltwater, is one way you could look.
Great. Okay. Um, yeah, I think those are good ideas for our man in India to just basically try connecting via phone with some of these bigger libraries. So, Carl, what's your advice around the byline? What is a byline? Will you get a byline when you contribute an article? And what's your advice about how to handle that?
Two bylines. One is the byline at the top of the article, which says by Carl Friesen.
Literally the word by, by.
Yep, by.
Yeah.
Then there's what they call the extended byline at the bottom. And this is a little bit of controversy here, because what the extended byline is there to demonstrate your credibility as an author. It's also to give you contact information to the reader. So if they want to get in touch with you, they can. Now, some editors don't like to have that kind of stuff because they think it sounds too much like commercialization of their sacred news pages. But generally, I'll put it in there anyway. So at the end of the article, I'll put down a paragraph that might be something like, Carl Friesen is a detox reporter who tries to tell clients how to get themselves published. Can be reached at email address, website. I'll throw in Twitter. I'll throw in other sorts of things. So if they want to get in touch with you, they can. Now that's really, really important. But now, hey, we got LinkedIn, we got Google. They can find you. If they want to find you, they will.
Okay.
But it's a good idea to throw that, what they call an extended byline at the bottom.
Great.
Some editors don't take them. They won't publish your contact information, which is them being pure. But hey, they got the article for free. They owe you that, So I always ask for it and put it in there. They can take it out if they want.
Okay. So have you seen like an example query letter that you would point people to, or maybe you have that in the download here? I don't know, but point people.
The outline is there. Also on the website, there are a ton of articles on how to develop an effective query letter, and also other aspects of building your thought leadership profile and stuff. But the query, just 4 points, and that is in the download.
That's great. Okay. Any other tips on topic selection? Like I know that, the one piece of advice you'll come across is you should always have an angle, right? You should always have an angle on something that kind of makes it your unique perspective, et cetera. And I love the framework you presented for choosing topics. I guess I'm just wanting to, try to flesh out any additional tips you might have about that.
It has to be something that matters to them,
That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's why I like newsjacking and what I call narrowcast newsjacking. So it's around what matters to them. And it could be a new regulatory change. A lot of my clients have to deal with that a lot. Yeah. Or it could be a new law that came down. And it doesn't have to be a law in your area. Like I developed a whole article around managing asbestos contamination in in ocean-going ships because of a new regulation for the International Maritime Organization, which I had never heard of. If the International Labor Organization comes out with something, that's something you can hang your article off of. So it could be a UN, it could be a state or equivalent, it could be a national type of legislation. It has to be something that matters to them, and something is going to hurt or help. But pain is better and more motivating to how to avoid a problem and how to get a benefit.
Indeed.
So, you have to. Sometimes you got to point out to them, here's why it matters. Here's why it's going to hurt you. So, but that's just good old sales technique. You should have that in your marketing literature and, in fact, your business plan anyway. Because if you're not solving a problem, why are you there?
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, well, my last question, and then I again want to repeat my invitation for folks in the audience to ask questions. But my last question is, do you have any shortcuts for newsjacking, trend spotting? Like, I assume, you should set up some Google alerts, right? or Google News alerts so that you get emails when something matches a search query. Any other tips that you found helpful for kind of staying on top of what's happening?
I would say follow the right social media. Mm-hmm. Like there are a lot of LinkedIn groups on various topics that would be relevant to you that your people hang out in. So particularly if they're industry groups and they'll let you join, you just get an idea from that, because a lot of news comes through LinkedIn groups. Follow the right people on Twitter is also a way to do it. So I think that that a lot of the news kind of tends to get broken in social media and other niche bloggers as well, because they want to develop this kind of content. Follow the association websites, because they quite often crank out new stuff. And talk to people that you're trying to reach as clients. What's new in your world? What's coming down the pike? A lot of my clients are involved in, say, a major engineering firm, environmental engineering, and they're quite often asked for their input on draft regulations that are coming down. And so they're then able to talk about that. They can say, hey, the safety board is considering this regulation, and here's our scoop on here's why this matters or why it doesn't matter.
Very cool. Thanks for joining, Casey. Okay, so a learner had a question. He said not directly related to the subject, but just would like to know a bit about your background out of interest and curiosity. It's obvious, I think, to everybody here that you have a ton of experience. So I think he's just wanting to know a little bit more detail about how you got from, crib to
first to here.
Subject.
Okay, real brief. No, I was a reporter for a good many years. Like at my undergrad university, I kind of got wrapped up in the student newspaper, and that kind of got me interested in publications. And so I worked on community papers and daily papers, did a journalism degree, and then eventually I decided, no, I don't want to be a reporter anymore. So I kind of, as they say, went to the dark side. Went into PR, and we have a new, Star Wars movie out there. The dark side is kind of a topic, I think, these days. But yeah, I worked in media relations for KPMG, the accounting firm, for many years, and a lot of their people wanted to publish articles, and so I learned how to ghost from there. And then I kind of set on my own. I could do this on my own. I get more money, have more fun, stay at home, and all that. So yeah, most of my clients are currently engineering and law firms and other people who need to publish content. So I just sit down with them, get an idea of who they want to make famous, and then I help develop a topic and find a publication and pitch the idea to the editor. But I've kind of been expanding out of that into developing more online courses. So I got one of those on the go right now. There is one on Udemy, I think it is, Udemy, but that's a few years old, and I'm not real pleased with it. I kind of wish they'd take it down. But yeah, developing another online course on how how engineers specifically can get themselves into more thought leadership kind of category.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so any more questions? I guess this is last call for live questions for Carl. So I'm going to take that as Carl covered the subject. So in enough detail that we don't really have any questions. So with that, Carl, I just want to say thank you. This was a fantastic presentation, and I really think that I like that you gave folks what to me is a usable framework for doing this. It's that right balance of like theory and application that I love to see. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not that scary, really. What you got to remember, editors, they need content, okay? Because they can't afford freelancers anymore. They can't write too much stuff themselves because they got too many other things to do. So they really do need relevant, well-written content for their publications, and so it's a mutual need there. So yeah, give them a try. Even if they sound like jerks, they're not really being jerks. They're just being themselves.
Do you have any other tips? Like, I guess that's one question I forgot to ask. Is there any other aspect of this that's like kind of emotionally challenging or is going to catch people by surprise the first time they try it?
When your headline gets changed.
Okay.
They spend all their time crafting this headline. It's supposed to be so important from a content marketing point of view. Have the right keywords in there, the right length, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the thing that's going to get changed the most often.
Okay.
Because editors of a print publication, some like headlines that are really long, some like 2-word headlines, some like a headline with a deck. There's the main headline, then there's underneath it, there's something.
Yeah.
So I'd say take a look at the publication. They've all got their own style. And so I write the headline based on what the editor likes. If the editor likes, 2 or 3 simple words and then an explanation underneath it, that's what I'll give them. If they want a 6-word headline that is just itself, that's what I'll give them. So some people get so bent out of shape over how the editor changed their stuff. Editors sometimes will edit for lengths. I have had very, very occasionally errors edited into the article, which gets scary. Like one, it was up here in Canada. We have Indian reserves. Mm-hmm. In the US, they're called reservations. Mm-hmm. I'd written this article about a reserve in Calgary that it was in a US publication. So the editor changed it into a reservation, which made my client look illiterate when it comes to what you call American Indian, what we call First Nations issues.
Got it.
So that was about the worstest example that I can come up with. There's also the length of time it takes. That quite often you put your article out there, and it just takes months, and you don't hear back. Yeah. And eventually you get it.
Okay.
So that's a thing that gotcha some people have trouble with. It takes so long.
Yeah, I mean, probably it seems to go without saying, but you mentioned length. And I imagine as a part of your research of the publication, you would get an idea of what length articles they tend to publish and just try to match that, right?
Yeah. And something I should mention is that a typical 1-page article would be about between 650 to 700 words. And you can do the word count in Word. It'll tell you how many words your article is. A 2-page spread around 12 to 1,500 words. A little longer in UK publications because they have a tiny bit bigger pages. Mm-hmm. But those are good, useful word lengths to pursue.
Okay.
Philip's right. Take a look at the publication, see what they publish.
Okay. Well, again, Carl, thank you. Thanks everybody who attended and folks who aren't here but are watching the recording. Thank you. You can find Carl online if you have specific questions about this presentation. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you.
Oh yeah.
And we'll try to do something like this again next month with a different guest. Not that I wouldn't want to have you back, Carl. I would, but I like this format, so we'll try it again. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop.